the European Union just decided to permanently freeze 140 billion euros or so of Russian state assets and basically expropriate the Russian state. What does this mean for Europe as an economy and as a marketplace? Here to help with this question is Dejan Soskic, a professor at the University of Belgrade and former governor of the Serbian Central Bank. Dejan, welcome back.
Thank you so much for your invitation.
Well, thank you very much for first talking about this via email and now actually being willing to talk about this on camera. You as a former central banker, what did you think when you heard that they're actually going to do it? That they're not just freezing these funds, on a 6-month basis that needs renewal, but they're going to permanently freeze it. And there's close to zero chance to get these funds freed anytime soon.
Yeah, well, that's, I would say, quite an unusual and harsh decision to make. And I would say that, teaching finance to undergraduates and teaching about the fundamentals of how the financial system works, we always need to address the confidence as a very important component of a financial system. Confidence is substantial for having trust in the currency that you use, so that you have the trust that the currency is going to be capable of, let's say, preserving your purchasing power until the next day you decide to use it. But also confidence in all of the financial instruments, meaning also deposits and lines of credit and, respecting of ownership over assets which are being lended to anyone else. And deposit in a bank is a type of a line of credit. Whenever you put your money in a bank account, that is as if you have been lending your money to the bank itself. Then the bank obviously uses those funds to extend lines of credit and to do other things with your money, investing in securities, providing also additional guarantees, and all other banking activities that are out there as a standard activity of a normal bank. However, undermining confidence in a financial system is something that it seems to me that is being used very lightly in the current situation that we're living in, especially in the domain of these deposits of the Central Bank of Russia in Euroclear and in other countries. That is, the sovereign property and ownership of a state, and you cannot easily assume that such money is in any case being a product of, let's say, activities which could easily be held accountable under some legal procedure in the court of law. You could not easily make parallels with, for instance, court of law, which can sometimes enact the seizure and freezing, actually, of assets of individuals which are processed for criminal activities. That is something that comes as a decision, very, very frequently a temporary decision from the court of law, until the whole court procedure is being held and until you have the verdict on which you can basically do the following steps. So this type of freezing of assets without any court procedure, especially in case where the states are owners of assets, where you cannot envisage criminal activities being source of these assets. That is the point when we are talking about freezing of assets of suspected individuals which are in a court of law under the procedure and so on. The suspicion is that they have been generating and producing these assets out of criminal activities, and therefore they should be stopped in using those assets for other purposes and hiding them away and things like that, in obviously an effort to bring these assets back to the, let's say, lawful owners, or to pay taxes, or basically to be confiscated by the state in which an individual has committed certain crimes. But the parallel in case of state assets simply does not hold. That's one I would say an important point to underline. And the second point that we need to have in mind is that here we are talking about the decisions of executive bodies, like the commission. Okay, it's part of the executive branch of state power. It's not legislative, it's not judicial, it's executive. So if the executive power is so strong to, let's say, be stronger than the contract and the right of ownership, then it is, I would say, the bad message for the overall functioning of the legal framework of the jurisdiction in which such things occur. And in this case, I would say there is an additional thing to worry, and that is we are now dealing with euro-denominated assets. First of all, they were in the form of securities within the Euroclear, and Euroclear is a little bit more complex institution than usually is being discussed. It has the branch which is keeping securities as a depository, but there is also Euroclear Bank where the settlement takes place. So clearing and settlement takes place in this institution. It has also the network of connected institutions to do clearing and settlement via this Euroclear Bank. So deposits in the Euroclear Bank are deposits as anyone else's. Like if you and me would have a deposit in a bank, we expect the bank to honor our deposit. And also, if something goes wrong with the bank itself, there is something which we call deposit insurance guarantee scheme, regularly owned by the government itself. Like, for instance, in case of Euroclear Bank, that should be Belgium, part of the Euro system, and it is being supervised by the Central Bank of Belgium as part of the European system of central banks, which is now supervising the major banks within the Eurozone, part of the banking union, as we know. So a lot of questions can be raised here. How do you, first of all, what is the legal ground to freeze some assets? What is the legal ground also to not allow income on these assets to be freely available to the owner of these assets? That's, let's say, the second thing that occurred. And now the third thing is basically continuous, or let's say indefinite freezing of the assets. And on the legal grounds, which as far as I'm following, I see that the discussion is actually about that Russia is responsible for war crimes and it should be paying reparations and things like that. But I haven't seen a tribunal established that has made any final decision on this issue. So this is like, making decisions in advance instead of the court of law, and assuming that certain decisions are going to be made in a court of law, which is, I would say, very far-fetched proposal on the side of proponents of this idea. So I would say that, from the legal point of view, it is a disputable act. And from the point of view of the confidence in the overall banking system of Europe, the confidence towards the institutions like the Belgian Central Bank and the Belgian government, but also since the Euroclear is one of the largest clearing systems in Europe. Besides Euroclear, you have Clearstream, which are doing most of the transactions in securities. That would also be a signal to any investor wanting to invest in euro-denominated financial assets, including sovereign debt bonds issued by any country within the Eurozone. If this stays in power without some, let's say, legal backing that would, support such a act in a much more, let's say, appropriate way, I see that this will deteriorate the confidence, not just in Euroclear as an institution, but also in euro as a currency, and also towards all of the securities being issued in euros, which are cleared in Euroclear. And most of those are actually sovereign debt bonds issued by member states of Eurozone and some others also. So this is, in my view, something that really is, I would say, against the basic principles of sound financial system. If we want to look back, let's say, in history, we will see that rulings on how important confidence is, you can find even in one of the oldest texts in the world concerning legal documents. The Hammurabi text in ancient Sumerian state claims that whoever does not pay back whatever they own are going to be enslaved until in that way they repay back. So building confidence in a system of finance is a crucial component which shouldn't be undermined. And this step, in my view, is not a step in the right direction.
Can you tell me, before we continue on this, like, why do central banks hold foreign currency denominated assets in other jurisdictions. Why does the Russian central bank have euro denominated assets in Euroclear? And I suppose the Americans do the same, and the Europeans have probably assets in the US and probably in Japan and so on. Why do they do that? What are these funds usually used for?
Well, America is a special case because dollar is a special case, and they have the possibility to issue dollars, so they do not need to have that much of reserves. But let's say for other countries in the world, it is a normal procedure to have something which is called FX reserves. Those are the reserves uh, mainly in the currencies in which the country has most of the trades going on currently. They buy and sell goods, and you need to also analyze what is the currency stipulated in invoices for trade between the entities in your country and the rest of the world. So, for instance, main trading currency obviously is dollar, but on the second place it is euro. So it is normal for the countries, smaller countries and emerging economies, even Russia, to keep reserves. Even China keeps their FX reserves in dollars and other currencies, especially euro. Euro is basically the second most important. Now the RMB, the Chinese RMB, is also, let's say, getting into the spotlight concerning this, feature of keeping the FX reserves. So FX reserves are kept there to be capable of being used by the central bank to provide for the external liquidity of the country, meaning that anyone who wants to pay anything to foreign creditor is capable of exchanging their local currency for the foreign currency which the foreign creditor expects to receive. So that is basically there to provide, let's say, seamless operation of international transactions. And sometimes it can also be used, these FX reserves, they can be used to intervene in the FX market, so to, let's say, eliminate huge instabilities in the FX rate, or sometimes if you want to, fix the exchange rate for a certain period of time, you can do that by intervening on the FX market, and you do those interventions from the FX reserves. So getting back maybe to the step previously that we should have mentioned, FX reserves could be held in basically three types of assets. Money on the accounts of banks elsewhere, even foreign banks, and these banks need to be of highest quality possible. Then second type is in securities. And again, these securities need to be of the highest rate possible, mainly government bonds and mainly of large countries which are fiscally capable of, without a problem, repaying back in time, or what we would otherwise refer to as, let's say, highly rated countries by the rating agencies like AAA or AA. Those are the type of bonds that you would like to have in your portfolio. And third asset is gold. And gold is, as you can see, in the last couple of years, very much in demand. We are, witnessing the increase in prices, and one of the reasons for this increase in price is basically that the central banks throughout the world, especially in the global south, are, more prone to buy gold to keep their FX reserves as gold. One aspect of that is maybe to shy away from dollar. The other is also to be more safe, on the safe side, concerning potential freezing of assets and any other thing like that. We have mentioned in our previous video when we discussed this similar issues that this is not the first time similar thing is happening. We had it with Afghanistan, with Venezuela, with Iran, and some other countries. So it's not just like some people are saying this is a one-off situation. This is no longer a one-off situation. This has been going on for some time, and that's the reason why for the soundness of the current financial system, the decision makers should really, really try to avoid something which is basically detrimental for the soundness and confidence in the system. If I may just add one thing, there is quite a number of, well-known theoretical works in the domain of confidence as being major pillar of the financial system to operate. One of them is obviously by George Akerlof, who, published the paper back in 1970s, Market for Lemons, where actually the main conclusion is that if you have no confidence, if you have huge informational asymmetry, if you have no confidence, the market will collapse. So without confidence, financial markets simply do not work. And I can tell you that coming from the country in which the banking system actually ceased to operate in the normal way during the 90s due to the United Nations sanctions and hyperinflation at that time, simply the money was not flowing through the system. People were wanting to get out from the local currency and were trying to buy alternative assets denominated, especially at that time, in Deutschmarks. And that has been a huge blow to the financial system of my country. We are, even now, today, we're suffering the consequences of that. Despite the fact that for decades now, Serbia has low inflation, has a stable exchange rate, doesn't have any manifestation of instability, people still tend not to keep their savings in local currency, but predominantly they are keeping them in euros. And they tend not to save in long term, but tend to save and have deposits short term, because once upon a time, 25 or 30 years back, their deposits have been frozen for a decade, and that experience is something that investors and deposit keepers tend to hold in back of their memory for a long time.
So this probably puts downward pressure on the currency, right? In exchange rates.
To a certain extent, I would say that this will affect the demand for euros as a whole, for every asset, including the currency of euro, but also the securities issued in euros. So I wouldn't be surprised that there is an effect which would basically increase the cost of borrowing for all of the countries in the eurozone to a certain extent. Maybe not significantly, but certain influence should be there.
Why is it that Russia had so many assets in Euroclear? Because, to my mind, I thought that, the Bank for International Settlement, the BIS in Basel, was the bank for central banks. I thought they fulfilled that role of making sure that central banks can still clear each other's debts and that the money system flows. Why is it that so much money was in that Euroclear account? Is it just the choice for the European Union, the gold standard?
There are basically two reasons. One is that there is obviously the structure of Russian trading with the rest of the world is such that they obviously have been using euros in a lot of their transactions.
So
mainly,
not just with the European Union, maybe also with countries outside that accept euros as payment.
Absolutely, maybe also with other countries. But the other reason is that the choice of central banks in the last decades is to choose securities. And if you want to buy securities denominated in euros, then obviously you will have to deal with Euroclear. That is one of the main clearing and depository facilities, which has also the Euroclear bank within this system, which is used for settlements. So what would normally be the case would be for the Central Bank of Russia to have an account within the clearing system, like an account within the depository system, where securities would be registered under the ownership of the Russian Central Bank, but also to have an account within the Euroclear bank where the settlement would take place. Okay, so those are, let's say, these standard ways of dealing with the securities as part of the FX reserves. It doesn't mean that central banks wouldn't have accounts in cash and in securities elsewhere also, but the major infrastructure facility for clearing a settlement in euro-denominated securities is Euroclear and Clearstream to a certain extent, but Euroclear is number one.
So by the way, have you ever seen that system yourself? Do I have to imagine that like a little bit like my online banking system, where the Russian central bank would have access to an online portal and then see 140 million and what is in securities, what is in assets, and then, okay, put this here and pay this one for that? Do I have to imagine it like this?
No, basically those are the book entry system entries electronically, entered amounts of money that you have on your account and securities that you have on your depository, like the trading system. Basically Euroclear is doing a similar job as the central depository system for securities is doing on a national level in most of the countries. So you need to have a place where ownership over securities is being registered, and it is registered mainly through some financial intermediary, like the brokerage house or a bank. In case of central banks and Euroclear, I believe that this communication is direct, so the central bank can have a direct sub account within the clearing house, basically Euroclear, and on the other hand, they can have an account within the Euroclear bank. So that is what you basically have when you're dealing with securities. You either have securities or you have cash, which is a consequence of sale of securities or maturity of securities. Most of these securities that were held by the Russian central bank have matured in the last couple of years, so the money has been transferred into their money account within the clearing bank.
On the scale of what is happening here, like 140 billion euros sounds like a lot of money to you and me, but the Swiss national budget, last time I checked, was somewhere around, that was 10 years ago, 65 billion Swiss francs, which today in euro would be about 70. So maybe at the moment it's around 80 billion that the Swiss government spends on an annual basis to fund itself. How big is $140 billion for a state like Russia? Is it a significant amount, or is it something that you think they are already they wrote off quite a while ago, as in, okay, it's gone?
Well, it's a significant amount. You cannot underestimate the figures that are actually being in circulation are even sometimes higher, 180, even 200 billion of euros. But for the economy, which is roughly about 6.5 trillion, that's certainly, let's say, a couple of percentage points of their GDP, yearly GDP. So it's definitely a large amount of money. I'm sure that economy of that size can survive without that money. That's I would say not an issue, but it's the matter of principle, I would say, and the matter of legality, and the matter of do you support the basic pillars of European financial system, or you're undermining it by decision makings like this. And obviously, at this point in time, we are also hearing about certain ways the whole scheme is going to be done, and it's, to say the least, very peculiar. For instance, I was listening yesterday on Deutsche Welle, Mr. Hugo Dixon, who was announced as the one that has designed this whole financial scheme. And he's not just not an EU citizen, he's a citizen of Great Britain, but it also is not either a legal expert or expert in finance. He's done his major in philosophy, right? And he's a journalist and an entrepreneur, and whatever you can find on the internet does not in any way connect him to the finance. And what is being said is that now, since the money is on the account of the Euroclear bank, then the Euroclear bank can freeze it, but also at the same time use this money to extend the loan to the European Union, and then the European Union to extend the loan to Ukraine, and then Ukraine would be required to repay back this loan only if Russia pays war reparations, and so on. Everything else is, let's say, completely fine. That the European Union is giving the loan to Ukraine if it wants, and if the terms of this loan is that this loan is repayable only if Russia pays the war reparations, that's nothing to object to. But the problem is, how do you make the Euroclear bank let's say obliged to extend the loan to European Union from the funds which are deposited in someone else's name? So I would say that this is something that can hardly be explained other than confiscating someone else's assets and basically doing things which are completely contrary to the contract which is being signed when you open an account. When you open an account in a bank and deposit money, there are certain very let's say well-known criteria and obligations on one side and the other side, and that's in such contracts there is never stipulated that money is going to be frozen if there is a certain political decision and things like that. That's basically very, very awkward to occur in a financial system, and I would say that it's detrimental for the confidence. And we have been discussing slightly before our recordings of this talk about certain things being imposed to individuals and things like that. We also know that previous Prime Minister of Canada did some very, very problematic steps with the truckers union and recall the strikes of the truckers and their assets being frozen. So those practices are really fundamentally wrong if we want to preserve the confidence and well-being of the financial system. And what is in addition to that, they're actually fueling these conspiracy theorists' agenda that the money can be misused against an individual, and then people start again preferring cash and are against digital currencies and things like that, all because we see that some irresponsible acts are being done. And I would say without competences in the field of finance, because it is very easy to destroy confidence in the financial system. It is very hard to regain that confidence and trust, and it is vital for the normal financial intermediation and operation of the financial system to have confidence on all sides. If we maybe look back to any financial crisis, if we recall one in 2008, every time there is a financial crisis, what is happening is that the system is obviously going to present some people or processes that are guilty, but also to amend the legal framework so to not to allow for the crisis to occur again. And that is being done precisely because the confidence needs to be reestablished for the system to work. Once you are not capable of reestablishing the confidence, then the system doesn't work well. It has a high level of costs associated to financial transactions, and the overall positive effect to the overall economy is less than could have been.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, financial transactions are a question of rights and obligations. The Russian state has a right to these funds being transferred to whoever it chooses, and the European Union said, like, no, we're now changing the rules of the game. You don't have that right anymore, and we will maybe give it you back after 6 months. But now they made this thing permanent. It's not about where this thing lies. It's about what the promise used to be, what you can do with it and what not. The thing that I don't understand, also from a theoretical standpoint, is like, why does the scheme that they came up with imply that these funds are now being used to make a loan or back a loan that the Europeans make to Ukraine? Because from my understanding, especially of the accounting side of things, once you make a loan, you at the same time create an asset. You don't actually need the physical funds in a place in order to loan them out, because once the Europeans give a loan, the Ukrainians have a liability to pay that back, right? So what is the idea of using that money? Why is that money so important to the Europeans in order to make that loan to the Ukrainians and kind of feel that they're off the hook for it? It's the Russians that are on the hook.
Well, in my view, it's because there is no available funds within the member states. The alternative to that would be that there is a contribution from all of the member states to find this money to extend the loan to Ukraine, because as we know, the budgets of most of the countries in the European Union are under strain. The overall level of debt to GDP is relatively high. We're now also facing some additional costs which need to be financed within the Eurozone. And one of those is obviously, if they want to follow what Mario Draghi was expressing in his paper concerning the European competitiveness. The other is also this discussion about whether European countries will increase or will not increase their contribution to defense sector to 5% of GDP. Those are huge amounts that need to be financed. And in times of recession, and in most countries, especially in Germany and some other countries, economic output is not really gaining pace. It is not easy to find additional source of funding. And what you're referring to is, I suppose, the creation of money through the activity of banks making credit lines. At the same time that they do, for anyone that is taking the line of credit, the bank is actually creating a deposit for them, and on the which is obviously on the side of liabilities, but on the side of assets, bank is creating a loan. That is not a problem, but this deposit would be immediately spent to purchase other goods and services on the name of Ukraine, and every financial institution that would be the one to extend such a loan that is being used immediately would basically, to a certain extent, have this deposit being taken out. And every day, the bank needs to take care about what are their overall assets and liabilities. And if they do not have enough assets, they would, at the end of the day, take a loan from other banks. Those are the so-called overnight lending facilities, which are used to basically cover the balance sheet for the day. And in the morning, they repay back and they start operations until the end of the day. So the relationship between assets and liabilities needs to be there, despite the fact that every time you are creating a loan, the deposit is also being created, but this deposit obviously does not need to be there for a long time and can be used for payments in case of, if Ukraine is directly taking the loan, it would most probably be paying whoever is a manufacturer of weapons and things like that. So that may be an entity which does not have a deposit in such a bank. So the funds would go out, and that would obviously create another financial situation for the bank that needs to be covered by the end of that trading day. So, whoever thinks that, just creation of money on the side of the banks is something that they can do without any restraints, basically we have a hard time explaining why does any bank go bankrupt, right? If they can produce money, without any limitations. So they are part of the money production process. The money is being produced by the central bank through the issuance of the so-called monetary base, but the banks are also very, very important part of that, which are creating money through the credit activity. And also related to that, when we go back, and very many people are asking the question, how was the case that Ben Bernanke was issuing so much money in 2008 and no inflation occurred in the United States? Precisely because the lending activity of banks went down. So the central bank needed to step in and produce a lot of this base money, in the system. And therefore, you didn't have inflation going on. Despite the fact that huge production of money was there present. And in Eurozone since 2015, you do recall the years of Draghi and his struggle with some of the countries, whether to, do the quantitative easing or not to do the quantitative easing. And finally, at the end, in 2015, ECB also started money creation in a large scale, very frequently called, extraordinary monetary policy or quantitative easing, huge production of liquidity.
But do you think that overall, if they make such a fuss about this 140 billion, do you think that they expect this money not to be paid back? It's like, if it came from just a normal credit line in the European Union, it would be certain that the banks would extend it, or the facilities that extend it will not see it coming back. Ukraine, it's more or less understood by the Europeans that Ukraine will never give this back, right? So that's why you want to secure it with another asset, which would balance their balance sheets, right? It's about that one, and you do that with an immobilized asset of the Russians. Is that the idea?
Well, obviously, the country in the situation in which Ukraine is currently is very hard to repay back any loan. We do not know all the extent of destruction and what is going to be the capacity in terms of GDP in Ukraine in midterm and long term, whether there is going to be any possibility for Ukraine to pay back anything. In my view, that is the country that should not be paying back, but should be attracting in grants and other financial support to try to rebuild itself to the extent possible. However, concerning this scheme, which has been discussed, we very frequently hear the term collateralized loan, like the assets of Russians are going to be used as a collateral. Now, that is a very peculiar thing to assume because, first of all, that would suggest that you can use someone else's assets to collateralize the loan that you're giving to the third party without the consent of whoever is an owner of these assets. So if I was the one giving the loan, which should be collateralized with such assets of anyone else without their consent, I would really not be doing such a loan, because how can I rely on getting hold of the assets in spite of the wishes of the legal owner? So collateralization in that sense, in my view, is very unlikely. However, what I've heard listening to Mr. Hugo Dixon, who presents himself as an architect of this scheme, he's talking about something else. The permanent freeze that has been enacted last week by European Union, practically the permanent freeze, right? Without, everyone needs to vote for it to be revoked. So this practically permanent freeze is going to be used as, let's say, the grounds to actually use this money to give a loan to European Union so that it can give a loan to Ukraine, and that this loan is only going to be repaid back if the Russians are paying war reparations to Ukraine. So this is, in my view, how to say, it's hardly something that you could consider really a serious and sound proposal. It is something that, in my view, has a lot of problematic concepts in itself. It's an unusual, at least to say, a very unusual financial instrument. And I would say it's legally highly disputable and with negative effects on the European financial system. And I am not surprised that we have heard not just the CEO of Euroclear being, at least to say, reserved about the whole thing, but also the president of ECB, also the prime minister of Belgium. This is something that can produce serious undermining of confidence, but also legal disputes with uncertain outcome. Without uncertain outcome, whoever thinks that it is easy to foresee what a certain court of law is going to decide on this issue, I'm quite doubtful that it is a realistic assumption. It's very, very possible that in certain jurisdictions, the outcome might be even favorable for the legal owner of these assets.
And is like Europe, the European Union, the only place where Euroclear might now be on a hot seat, because they're ultimately, Euroclear is the one who did the promises towards the Russians, right, to the Russian central bank. They're the ones who are supposed to fulfill their obligations, but that are now gonna under that scheme gonna be incapable of doing so. Is only Europe, the EU, the place where legal disputes might occur, or would the Russians be able to say like, oh, Malaysia might have a business relationship with Euroclear, and they could use Malaysian courts in order to say like, hey, we have disputes with the entity that you are having a business relationship with. Is that a possibility?
Well, that's a very interesting line of thinking, I would say, and I wouldn't exclude that would be a possibility. Obviously, this is a legal question, but what I do know is that Euroclear has branch offices in Hong Kong, Japan, Singapore, and in Dubai also, and in Beijing, some representative offices. So I'm not sure whether that makes any solid ground for taking this dispute to the courts in those jurisdictions, but I wouldn't exclude such a possibility. It's obviously a legal question, and lawyers would know more. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So overall, what we are seeing here is another example of how certain political forces inside the democratic West are able to undercut the processes that they assured everybody was like ironclad, right? Even during the Second World War, state assets of adversaries were frozen, but they were not expropriated. Because here we are talking about basically a second-degree expropriation, even if we don't call it that yet. It's interesting, though, that they don't move toward that. They don't officially created a directive or a law that says from now on these 140 billions belong to the EU. They don't belong to them anymore. Why do you think they're going through that weird scheme instead of going straight to good old expropriation? I mean, what the Soviets did with a lot of assets of private citizens in communist countries. I mean, I'm pretty sure in Yugoslavia there was expropriations, massive expropriations when the communists came in. Why not that route?
Well, obviously, it would be embarrassing for the Western countries to officially claim that they're doing such a thing, I would say. And they're trying to depict the process in a way that it's somehow acceptable and possibly resistant to legal disputes. However, in my view, the first step of the whole way that has been described by Mr. Hugo Dixon and some of the other officials, in my view, is very, very, very problematic. And that is, how do you convert assets denominated, basically legally owned by one party, to be the basis for giving these assets to anyone else? You know, that is not honoring the basic contract of the deposit. That is basically completely contrary to the normal way of doing financial business. And that is something for which the bank itself may be liable, but also, you know, the government of Belgium, to a certain extent. I would say that there are a couple of channels where the liability may also fall to the government level. And I'm really pleasantly surprised in the overall discussions that are going on to hear voices of reason from the Prime Minister of Belgium. You know, that is one thing is that you want to help Ukraine. There is no problem with that. The other reason is how do you do it, and are you really sacrificing something which is of greater importance for the financial system of Europe than any individual loan? I mean, this is, as you have said, these are the funds which are not, let's say, unattainable. This is obviously speaking in billions of euros or dollars. That those are the large amounts of money, but 100 billion and 200 billion are not impossible figures, especially for the European Union and the countries of the West. That is something that could have been attainable, in my view, in a better way. And you know, as far as I'm following these things, it would have been enough, more than enough, and to send a clear message to the Russian government concerning the stance of the West towards the war in Ukraine, to freeze the assets. All of these other steps that are being taken, in my view, are, you know, too much of stepping into uncharted territory with serious consequences concerning stability of the European financial system.
If you were now still the governor of the Central Bank of Serbia and you saw what's happening, and you also realized that Serbia has a rocky relationship with the EU. I mean, on the one hand, Serbia wants to join. On the other hand, there's all of these demands and so on, and you don't know where things go. What would be your rational decision, what you do next, if you know that Serbia has a considerable amount of money in Euroclear? Would you try to look at other places to do the same? Would you start looking at the Bank for International Settlement to kind of transfer funds there, something that's outside the jurisdiction of the Eurocrats?
Well, this is obviously, BIS is obviously an interesting alternative. They do have certain instruments which are available for the central banks to be invested in. But also, you know, we need to acknowledge the new reality of the world, and that is that countries all over the globe are very frequently buying a lot of things of various nature, even high technology, from China. You know, China is being hugely important in global domain. We have seen that even the United States cannot disentangle itself from the Chinese imports and exports, and especially in certain domains. And therefore, what is now being put in place is the alternative financial instruments denominated in Chinese currency, which could be really an attractive assets to have, especially bearing in mind the changing structure of the foreign trade for most countries. You know, if you look at what is happening in for instance, not just Asia, but Africa, even Latin America. The greatest individual trading partner is China. So then it makes a lot of sense to keep foreign reserves denominated in assets which you might be using for conducting your normal foreign trade. And therefore, if China steps in more in terms of issuing certain RMB denominated bonds and other instruments, I would say that that would be an alternative to analyze quite seriously to a certain extent, not just for the case of Serbia, for the case of any country, because China is obviously the industrial powerhouse of the world today. And we all tend to, I mean, we're looking at what is happening with the huge increase in sales of Chinese cars globally. Maybe America is an exception with these huge tariffs that have been imposed, but in Europe you're seeing the flood of new cars coming in, and people are buying them. They tend to be cheaper and with decent quality and things like that. So even additional amounts of money are going to be used to pay for these Chinese goods. And China, obviously now being one of the leading economies in the world, is expecting to be paid in their local currency more and more. And that is something that all of the smaller countries should also take into account concerning what foreign currency reserves to keep, because China may no longer be willing to accept dollars and maybe even euros in such an extent as it was ready to accept 5 or 10 years back. So adopting to these new realities is, let's say, also something that could reflect on what is the structure, the adequate structure of the FX reserves to keep for many small countries, especially the ones that are trading with China extensively.
Okay, so maybe China's gonna benefit from this entire affair, but is it, I mean, in a sense, just the logical next step in the multipolarization of the world that basically the West is now taking down parts of its own previous success, which is its fantastic financial system, right? I mean, basically you're sending a signal saying like, no, anyone who falls out with the Eurocrats will have their assets frozen. There's no more guarantees that due process will be kept.
Yes, and we have seen also some acts of, let's say, political decision making, for instance, from the side of the United States towards Brazil, which are, let's say, based on some personal relationship that a president of one country has with the previous president of that country, and things like that. I believe that the whole political arena has become declining in the level of seriousness and competence in many areas, and that is a worrying signal for the global system as we know it. And I believe that whoever has a strong position in global economy, in global financial system, and so on, should actually be aware of also the burden of that position. That is to act according to the high standards and supporting the values of the system on which it is based. People decided to trade in dollars and have accepted euro very, let's say, eagerly, because of honoring the contracts and because of the security of deposits, because of the rule of law in Western countries, because of efficient financial system, which is not going to be biased towards anyone, but actually free to be approached by any party and being treated equally. So those are, I would say, very important elements. And the weaponization of the financial system actually, I would say, works only when it is in the form of threat. When there is a threat for the usage of the financial system. But once you start using the financial system as a weapon, then you're basically undermining this financial system as your potential argument in global disputes and with your global adversaries and so on. So the usage of a financial system as a weapon, in my view, is the first point in end game for the dominance in such a financial system.
Yes. It's also highly embarrassing. It's a little bit like the sanctions. Like you threaten to do something and that will hurt you or kill you, and then you do the thing and well, it hurts a bit, but it doesn't kill you at all. Then you spend the card, right? The card is gone and that card won't come back. So you're losing leverage. Um, is there another aspect that I didn't touch upon that you think that we should keep in mind when we think about what's just happening with these assets?
Well, I think that some of the let's say possibilities to increase the liquidity of the financial system and of the countries within the Eurozone especially have not been explored in many aspects. We have seen, for instance, how European Commission and IMF have been treating the Greek crisis at the end of 2009 and what facilities have been used there. We see that the options being used have been suboptimal for the problem that was being dealt with. In my view, this is again the case in which the overall cost of let's say the overall benefit is far less than the potential negative cost by implementing such a solution. So to call it solution, I believe it's not really a solution. Some of the other methods could have been used. The whole value of this loan is relatively low in comparison to the overall financial system of the Eurozone, in the comparison to the capacity of the European Central Bank. There are some much more, let's say, viable financial options, in my view, to have been explored than the path of doing something which can be considered as confiscation of someone else's assets. So I would say that more creativity and less dogmatic approach would potentially produce results which could be much more favorable for the overall financial stability in the Eurozone and I would say globally also, referring to what is happening in the United States and the weaponization of dollar and things of that nature. I believe that these measures which are circulating and being discussed, in my view, are not really maybe mature enough even to be as a working paper, not that something like almost as a final solution for the issues that we are facing.
Yeah, it strikes me as a moment when the desire of the Europeans to punish Russia, to hurt Russia in one way or another, is even much more important than the desire to kind of help Ukraine. I somehow see like you could have done a ton of other things, but I think the idea that we need to punish Russia overtook to some extent. But as with the sanctions, I mean, I do believe that this will probably backfire worse on the European Union than it will cause strain on the Russian economy. Although I can't look into their heads, I can't know whether they are not maybe truly believe that this will hurt the Russians so bad. But it is definitely a new precedent, at least for the European Union. Don't trust them anymore is kind of the message, isn't it?
Well, I'm certain that time will pass until, let's say, confidence is going to be recovered if none of the similar moves are going to be implemented. It's not going to happen soon, but what is being done, in my view, is absolutely walking on the wrong track and producing more negative effects than benefits and gains. Concerning the the punishing of the aggressor and so on, that is I would say a logic that you cannot dispute. That's a fine line of thinking, that anyone who commits any type of aggression should be punished. But we are not really living in a world where that is always the case. I'm coming from the country which has experienced the bombing in 1999, which was without any resolution of the United Nations, basically contrarian to even the charter of the NATO itself. It lasted for 78 days, and we have received no reparations from anyone, and not to mention other countries, everyone with similar experience can tell you their side of the story. But we see that the world is not operating in a let's say unbiased and principled ways, and that is something that people tend to see and understand, and that's not a good message to send across.
No, this is very bad messaging. Dejan, thank you very much for this assessment of yours. People who would like to read more from you or your reports, if you produce them, is there a place where you publish your work?
I will hopefully soon have a Substack, and then I'll send it to you. If you could put it as a link later on, I would be more than grateful. Thank you.
I will do that as soon as I get it from you. It will be maybe not immediately when the video goes out, but later on it will be in the description box below. Dejan Soskic, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much. Thank you.